Hello everyone, welcome to another tutorial in this dungeon mechanics tutorial series. Today we're taking a look at a interactable door where when the player is holding the interact button down and while standing beside a trigger, the door actually opens, and when it walks away from the trigger or releases the interact button, the door will stop opening. So let's get into this tutorial. To make this interactable work, we need to notify the game when the player is holding the interact button and also when the player has released the interact button. The best way to implement this is using interface. So we're going to go to our content drawer, go back to our dungeon mechanics, and we're going to open up our interface for the dungeon manager and add two functions. The first one will be interact held, and the second function will be interact released. Now, every time the player is holding on to the interact button, we're going to trigger this function and send out a message. And when the player releases the interact button, we're going to shoot out this message through our interface. Let's compile this and save. Go back to our third person character. In here, we already have the interact pressed for our collectible. So we're just going to select these three, right click and collapse node and say interact pressed, just to keep it clean. And this is off of started. Now we want to send out a trigger when the player is holding the interact button. And when the player is holding the interact button, only one of these execution pins actually fires, which is the triggered. The triggered is the only one that will continuously keep firing when the button is held down. Everything else is a one shot except for the triggered. So we want to utilize this triggered. So we're going to say off of this triggered, get all actors with interface using that BPI Dungeon Manager. And now if you were to drag off of this and say interact pressed, nothing will happen. There's no options here. So the workaround to this, because this is an array, the workaround to this is you can just drag off of this or anything as a matter of fact and say get actor of class. And then off of this, we can say interact press. See how now you got the message? So this is a workaround to actually get this message function. And then we can delete this get actor of class and then now plug it into this array. So I'm going to get the interact held. And also off of this, I'm going to get the interact released. And now we don't need this actor of class anymore. Now we have both of our interact held and released as a message. So now we can connect this, and then now if we take our array actor, it actually allows us to connect it. And then let's connect this triggered over here, and we got ourselves our interact held function. And off of completed and also canceled, we're going to copy this get act all actors of class, and then go ahead and plug both of these into this, get all actors with interface, and then connect. Interact released. So when the player releases the button, cancels or completes both of these fires when the player releases the button. So we want to get it off of both of them and then send it here. Now let's make it nice and tidy and then right click on this, select both of these and then collapse node and say interact released. And this collapse node interact held. Oh, there you go. Make it nice and pretty. And that's all you need to do in your player function. We only care about the player's input. We don't care about anything else. So now we can go back into our map. So what I have done is I have gone over to Fab and I downloaded 3 different materials, meshes. So first one is this wheel. We want this wheel to spin when the player is holding the interact. And second one is this actual stone pillar. I want the stone pillar to retract when the player is holding the interact button. And then also this pillar is just more of a aesthetics, cosmetics thing. So we're going to work off of these 3 meshes. In your game, it can be completely different. And I'm just going to work off of this one because this is easily available. And all of these 3 meshes are free when you go to Fab. So let's go back to our dungeon mechanics. And inside of our events, we already have a door function. So we're going to utilize this, but we're not going to use that trigger event. We're going to do it a little bit different because this is more of a press and hold functionality rather than a one-shot trigger event. So I'm going to right click on here and create a blueprint class. Make this a class actor and I'm going to say BP underscore door underscore wheel. This is to create our wheel. I'm going to select the default scene root and then go ahead and put in a static mesh. Name this the wheel. And then another static mesh, and this would be the pillar. Select the wheel and I'm going to bring in the wheel. Oh, that's the wheel. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. I'm going to make it like 2, right? And then move this up, get the pillar. And this would be, I'm going to search for a pillar, and then I am going to select, oh, no, it's actually named column. And there you go. And I'm going to bring this down. So this wheel is kind of like sitting on top of the pillar. That's all we got to do. And is the wheel floating? No, wheel is not floating. I'm just going to move it up just a bit. Okay, there you go. That should do the trick. Now I'm going to select the wheel, and I'm going to add a sphere collision. What this sphere collision is to check if the player is standing by the wheel or not. So I'm just going to move this sphere collision right about the middle of this pillar. So anywhere if the player is standing around this radius, it should work. I'm going to make this radius like, let's say 100. We can actually go to the top perspective and see what the radius is. So this orange line is the actual sphere. So as long as the player is touching the orange line, it would trigger this collision. Let's make this like 120, just a little bit bigger. Compile and save. Again, in your game, you can feel free to make this smaller, bigger, however you would like. First thing that we want to do is we want to notify the game that the player is touching the trigger or player is not touching the trigger. So I'm going to select the sphere, right click, and I'm going to say add event on begin overlap. And select the sphere, right click on the sphere again, and then click on add event and say on component overlap. This is when the player steps on the sphere, and this is when the player steps off of the sphere. We're going to go ahead and create a new variable and say b is trigger enabled with a question mark. And I'm going to go and set here, copy and paste, set. This trigger will be enabled with a true. This trigger will be disabled with a false here. So both of these functions going to follow the common structure. So we're going to go ahead and get player character because we only care about our player character stepping inside of this trigger or not. Off of this other actor on our begin overlap, we're going to do an equal and check if it is the player character. And same thing here. Off of our other character, we're going to say equal. And I'm going to connect this to the bottom and check if this is the player character. And I'm going to put a branch here and a branch here. You can hold B in your keyboard, and when you click, you're going to get branches. It's a little shortcut. So now I'm going to connect both of these in here, and off of our main execution, I'm going to connect the branch in. And if it is the player that is stepping on, true, I'm going to go ahead and say enable the trigger. And again, if it's the player that stepped off, then off of the true, I'm going to make this a false. On top of this, we want to notify our door that we are also, the players actually have stepped on or stepped off the trigger. So because we're going to make the door a separate blueprint, we're not going to make it inside of here. So instead of having to cast to the door, let's just use our interface to communicate to it. So back in our interface, we're going to create a new function and name it enable trigger with a question mark. And here, or actually, you know what? We'll just make it wheel trigger. Wheel trigger and remove the question mark. And then here in our inputs, we'll make it enable trigger question mark. So B enable trigger question mark. And that'll be of type Boolean. So now what we're going to do in our wheel, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to say get actor of class, right? Drag this and say wheel, and you'll get the message. At this time, we only have one, so we're just going to take this. And then here, we're going to say get all actors with interface and plug this in. Now, you may choose to specify the actual door, and then you can say get actor of class and then search for the door here. The reason why I am doing get all actors with interface is because this is expandable. If you don't do it this way, then you have to go each and every single door one by one and then notify the trigger, the wheel trigger is active. Then it kind of defeats the purpose of the interface and the entire functionality. So if I just say get all actors with interface, it will get every single actor in the game using this interface and it will shoot out the message. Now, the good thing is if that blueprint does not have this wheel trigger event, then nothing's going to happen. There's no loss, right? There's no loss of resources. So this is the best way to do it. So again, I'm going to copy this and then put it down here. Off of the begin overlap, where we set our trigger enabled, we're also going to say the wheel trigger is enabled and set out the message. And off of where we turn off the trigger, we're also going to turn off the wheel trigger. Compile and save. We don't need begin play. We don't need actor overlap. We just need event tick. We're going to use event tick for this. First, I'm going to do is get our wheel. One thing you want to do is right now, the sphere and the pillar is a child of the wheel. So that means if the wheel is spinning, then the pillar and the sphere will also spin with it. So we want to disconnect that. So just drag the pillar and put it onto the default scene root, and then click on attach. That'll disconnect the pillar. Sphere doesn't really matter, but I'm going to disconnect it anyways. So now all these three are individual items. So if the wheel is spinning, everything else will stand still. You can choose to have the pillar spin with the wheel. If you want to do that, just drag it on top of the wheel and that'll do the trick as well. But for this purpose, we're just going to leave the pillar outside. So I'm going to get the wheel and then go get world rotation. I'm going to right click on this rotation and split this struct. And I'm going to say make rotator. The X value is going to stay the same. The Y value is going to stay the same. Off of the Z, I'm going to just add an increment of 1. For each frame, it's going to rotate by 1 on the Z axis. Now, the reason why I'm rotating on the Z axis is if I select the wheel, the Z axis, and then click on the rotation, do you see this blue? This is the rotation. Okay, so this will now add rotation, and now grab our pillar and say set world rotation. And this, we're going to connect it in here. And the event tick, we would connect it in here. Now, we have just done the function. That means if I turn on the game right now and then, add the blueprint in, the wheel will turn without any type of interaction of sort. Because we haven't really told this blueprint that if the player is holding on to the interact or not, because we haven't implemented the interface on this. So we're going to go to our class interface, class settings, interface, and then say BPI Dungeon Manager. Now that we have brought in the interface, and now we have this new interface dropdown, and if I select here, there is the two functions for interact released and interact held. So I'm going to right click on this and then go implement event. And then same thing on the interact release, right click and then go implement event. We want to now create a new Boolean and say be interact active question mark. Right? And then now I'm going to drag this in here and then say set. Same thing, copy and paste this down here and set. Connect both of these, and then off of interact held, we're going to make this true, and off of interact released, we want to make this false. Now, one more thing is because the player, when the player is holding the interact button, this function is going to constantly keep firing. We don't want to keep setting it to true again and again and again because when it's already true. So we can quickly do a branch here so that it only does it if the interact is false. Right, so off of the event interact held, we want to connect that interact active button. And if it is true, then don't do anything because it's already true. We don't have to do anything. Only if it is false, we're going to go and make it into true. Interact released will only fire once because once you release the key, then it will fire once and it will never fire again until you press the button and release it again. So we don't have to worry about this one. This one is good. So now off of our event tick, we're going to put in all of our triggers or our Boolean checks. First, we're going to go and check if the trigger is enabled. So we're going to get and add in a branch. So we're going to check if the actual triggers is the player overlapping the trigger. Then if it is true, then we're going to check to see if the player is holding the control down. If it is true, we're going to check if the player is holding the control down. And again, that's coming from here in event interact held, then this will be true. And as soon as the player releases the control, this will go false. So off of true, we want to set the world rotation. And now to quickly check this, we're going to go to our map, go to our content drawer, grab the door, and then we're going to just put it down here. Doesn't really matter. I added the pillar here and the wheel here, so I have to make this the wheel. Sorry. If I press F, you'll notice the wheel is spinning. And if I release, the wheel stops spinning. And if I press F and if I walk away from the trigger, the wheel stops. If I go close to the thing while holding F, it works. So it works exactly as we need it. Now let's go make the door. So go back to our content drawer, right click, create a blueprint class of type actor. So BP underscore door underscore pillar. Inside of here, we're going to go and add a static mesh. That's all we need for this. We don't need any triggers or anything like that, and then name this pillar. This would be of our type. Let's make the static mesh our pillar. This is the pillar that I want. And I'm going to place it in the game to see how it will look so I can size it accordingly. So if I drag this and put it in here, Obviously, this looks very, very skinny, so we have to fix that. And also, it doesn't reach from one end to the other end. So I'm going to go back to our content drawer, reset this to 1. Then I'm going to make sure that I lock this scale and then make it like 3. That makes it nice and big and also tall. And let's make it a little bit more bigger, like let's say like 4. Yeah, there you go. So that does the trick. And I can also rotate it this way so that the characters, the Japanese characters, are showing. So it adds a little bit of an effect to it. And that's that. And I can also like move it up a little bit as this you wanted to touch the wall. Okay. And I'm going to move it in closer and add a couple more of this. Okay. So now back in our blueprint, we're going to go in. And first thing that we're going to do is to add our interface. So go to our class settings and we're going to say BPI underscore dungeon manager, and now it's added. And we want to do the same thing that we did with our wheel. We want to know when the player is holding the interact and not holding the interact. For that purpose, just to make the time easy, we're going to select this whole thing, press copy, Control C, and then bring it to the bottom here and then press Control V. This will paste our functions, but you will notice that the interact active is actually gray. It's not red like a Boolean supposed to be. That's because we don't really have that variable here. To fix that, you can just right click on any of this, doesn't really matter. And then there will be an option for create variable for be interact active. Click on it and now you'll see it turn red and the Boolean is active here as well. So that fixes that problem. The second one that we need to know when the wheel trigger is active. Because if the wheel trigger is not active, we don't want the door to move. Just because the player is holding F, we don't want the door to move. We want the player to hold F and also be right beside the wheel trigger as well. For that, we're going to go to our interface and then right click on this wheel trigger and implement the event. And we're going to create a new variable to control this and then say wheel trigger status. Drag this, and then we're going to go set, and then drag off of this Boolean, and then set it. This way, when the wheel trigger is enabled here, then this will be true, and when the wheel trigger is disabled, this will be disabled as well. And now we're going to go to our function. We don't need this event begin player actor. We're going to go to our event tick, grab the pillar. We're not going to get our world location and then move it down the z-axis because this is no longer on the world z-axis. This is actually more of a relative z-axis. So we're going to use the relative location and then do it because z-axis in the world is up and down, not left and right. Although the z-axis in our blueprint is up and down, this is more of relative to this BP only, not relative to the world. So we're not going to get the world location. We're going to say get relative location. And we're going to right click and we're going to split this struct. And then we're going to right click again and say make vector. And we're going to connect the X and the Y here. And the Z axis, we're going to add 1. And we're going to plug this in here. We're going to grab the pillar again and say set relative location. And plug this into relative location. Now off of our event tick, we want to make sure before this gets set up, we want to make sure that our interact is active. So we're going to get our interact and then press a Boolean, B for branch, and then plug this into event tick. And if the interact is active, then we want to see if the wheel trigger is active. And again, same thing, another branch. And only if this interact active and wheel trigger status is true, then we're going to go ahead and set our relative location. Now let's check how this works in game. If I press play, you'll notice that when I press I interact, which is F key for me, if I press it, nothing really happens. If I go and touch this, and if I press the F key, you notice how the door moves. Now if I release the F key, the door will stop halfway because this is when the trigger is activating and deactivating. I can press F, tap F, whatever I want to do, and the door will open very, very slowly. And that would be that. And if the player stops pressing F, it actually stops functioning. Now, another thing that you notice is that this is more of a cosmetic thing. The player can continuously keep holding F for indefinitely. We can create a timer function and then check to see how long on the timer it takes for the door to completely open. And then based on that, we should go ahead and set a cap. So the door stops working after that timer has hit that specific point. So we're going to go to our wheel function and then add in a new integer and name it timer. And this would be of type integer. And first thing we're going to do is get our timer, and then we're going to increment this by 1, and we're going to print it so we can see how long it actually takes to open the door completely. So if I go here and if I press F, you notice that how it's printing. And if I stop, it stops. It's at 157. So, and then the door gets to like about that point, right? That's about 348. So we know that it takes about 348. We can even make it 350. It takes 350 on the integer to completely open the door. So off of this timer, we're going to go and say if this equals to or greater than 349. If it goes above 349, then we want to do a branch and say if it does, then we want to get this sphere, which is our trigger, and then go ahead and say destroy. Destroy component. So this will destroy the wheel and then it will stop the function. So if I go ahead and if I press F, you notice that it opens. It's getting to about close to 349. And then the door stops because the trigger now got destroyed. Now, if I go anywhere and come back, there's no more trigger. So that means the door will no longer be functional. That's how easy it is to get this done. That's it for the tutorial, folks. Thank you very much for stopping by in this Dungeon Mechanics tutorial series. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next tutorial. If you like this video, please feel free to hit that like button. This tells me that you like this type of content so I can keep generating more of this. And it also helps to reach out to more and more developers just like you who might need the assistance. And once again, have yourself a great evening and good luck in your game development. Thank you, Merle Peterson, for joining the Patreon and supporting this channel to grow.